Hello, hello. Happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome to Difficult Conversations, where we discuss issues affecting us and issues happening around us. Today, we are having part two of A Black Man Arise. And to discuss this with me, we'll bring back Mr. Ralph Black, Dr. Marshall, and all the way from South Africa, Joshua Maponga. Welcome back to the show. And with me also today, I have a Professor George Agoki. He has been associated with education both back in Kenya and the United States in a span of nearly half a century, 49 years to be precise. Currently, he is a professor of civil engineering at University of Texas Arlington, UTA. Prior to this, Professor Agoki served in various capacities, including 15 years at Andrews University, Michigan, 6 of those as chair of engineering department and the jail chaplaincy program of Bering Springs County in Michigan. When all is said and done, Professor Agoki has drawn very interesting insights from his work and life experiences. He holds membership in American Society of Civil Engineers, American Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers. He is married to one wife, Elizabeth Agoki, and they have both raised 4 children, Bianca, Mona, Bijon, and Chris, and 2 grandchildren, Talisa and Ariana. Welcome, Professor Agoki, to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to be here today. And before we start the discussion, and before I bring over Bianca to moderate the show, let's watch this clip. It's called A Beautiful Thing. And this was shot in the city of Chicago. And as we watch this clip, it's a short clip, let's ask ourselves, are we encouraging our next generation of Black men to become a better citizen? I hope you enjoy the show. After this, Bianca, you're welcome to the show, and I'll give it over to you.
The west side of Chicago is not a good place to grow up.
It was like a war zone. Some people ask what college you're going to go to when you grow up. In our neighborhood, the big question was what gang you're going to join.
A kid got shot in front of Mally, killed him dead right on the curb. It kind of makes you lose hope for your community.
How do you break out of that? But a chance encounter changed everything.
I walked inside the lunchroom and I see this boat.
I didn't even know what rowing was.
We don't even swim.
You gonna take some West Side kids over to the lake? Nah, that's not gonna work.
It brought guys from different neighborhoods, from rival gangs, together in one boat.
When it's calm and you out there, it take your mind away from any problems that you have. It brightened my life.
There was something about the water that gave us peace, and we all needed that.
Now, 20 years later, they're back on the water.
What are we training for here?
Chicago Sprints.
We trying to rewrite history here.
Training starts today, Shay.
Malcolm's doing this to show his son another way. Preston's going back in time to undo his mistakes. Alvin's racing to celebrate the fact he's still alive.
He's still alive.
Here.
Now you get an opportunity to start another generation. Do it. We're on the mission now.
It's going to be a remarkable moment when they come together and get to that starting line again.
Brothers encouraging brothers. That needs to spread like wildfire through our communities.
What he's doing is a beautiful thing.
When that flag comes down, there's only one truth. That they are still here.
Manly. Go!
All right, Miss Bianca, take over the show.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Nice to see you again. All right, we'll go right in. We're talking about manhood, Black manhood, African manhood. Of course, last week we tried to define it, but we did not come to an agreeing or consensus on what the Black man should be defined as. And I'm not sure whether one definition can encapsulate what it means to be a Black man. But let's try it today again. So, manhood. Is it something that's bestowed, earned, or can you learn it? Being a Black man. We're going to start from there today. Being a Black man and manhood, is it something that's bestowed on you, passed down through tradition, or does culture have something to play with it? And can it be earned, or can we help Black men learn what it means to truly be a man in society? And today we're going to just do it roundtable discussion type. This is the first time I'm going to address you in question format, so let's talk. Anybody can jump in. And I'll start with Mr. Marshall. Has your definition changed over the course of the week in your travels? Or shall we still keep the Afropean mindset here, Marshall? I'm just kidding, but kick us off here, Marshall.
Well, I was thinking about your question where is Black manhood bestowed, learned, or what was the third one?
Or can it be learned, or is it something that's inherently within yourself?
Inheritance. Yes. Okay.
Inheritance, or inherently something that's just in you.
Well, I mean, I'm Black. I'm proud to be Black. I mean, that's. I mean, we can make that very clear right there. But Black manhood, in my view, in terms of like the three, I think, in a sense, I think it's a little of all the above. I mean, yeah, we learn how to be men from our fathers, or father figures, or professors, or pastors, or deacons, or whoever. Like as an older man, the fun uncles, the real uncles, etc. Is also, and of course we inherit the tradition of what a Black man is supposed to do, which is in the context that we're speaking. The Black man is the protector of the family. He's the protector of the community. He's the one that is the leader that everyone looks to lead things. So we have inherited expectations, but then now what do you mean by bestowed? Like, does that mean that like it's something that that someone gifts us and says, today you are a Black man, or what do you mean by that, Bianca?
Well, culturally, from an African perspective, I know that manhood is something that's bestowed to you. It's something to hold in high regard. And as much as when it comes to the family unit, it's bestowed upon a man to be, as you said, the protector, someone to guide, even, and someone who's highly regarded in society. So that's
yeah. Yeah. In that respect, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's also bestowed because, I mean, in the American context, once you turn 18, you're considered an adult. And at that moment, the family looks to you to help pay for things or to help things happen. So especially if there's younger kids in the family, or your sister, your brother has children, you are looked to help protect them and help raise them as well. So yeah, like I said, it really is all three.
All right. So in that context, and then guys, the rest of the three of you can now jump in. So essentially, Marshall here has described to us, defined to us what it means to become, when did you become a man, actually? Because as you say, 18, then you're a man. You're supposed to go out, fend for yourself. You're legal, you can work. At 13, culturally or in a religious context, you're considered a man at 13 in some places, of course. And then 21, then you start having a career as a man. And then in your 30s, a man is defined as starting to figure out what life is, getting his family together in order, getting married, all those things. And then, of course, as they grow older, then they start to reflect on life and pass it on to other men, or vice versa. Okay, so let's go, guys, here. Any of you can jump in at this point.
Well, I'm happy to be in your show today. I participated in a small degree last week. What Miss Wilda did not state in a nice intro is that I'm a lifetime member of the National Society of Black Engineers. How did I get that? Who bestowed that to me? That will be a subject for another day. The question I have before I give my contribution is, do other men, yellow, white, brown, what have you, get to be asked the same questions of how manhood is bestowed on them?
All right. They may not be asked that, but as culture has it, or the things that surround why these questions of what is bestowed on them is because they find themselves always trying to define themselves. We find Black men trying to define themselves day by day. That's the thing. That's why I asked what is bestowed upon them, because in everyday life now, a Black man must constantly define who they are.
The reason I ask that is why we should be caged or put in a situation where we have to define and defend ourselves, our position, even inalienable rights that we should have as human beings. Why? Because perhaps we could be confusing this with passage, into a certain state as we grow up in different cultural contexts. So are we talking about rite of passage into manhood within a certain cultural milieu, or what?
All right, here we're talking a bit on a larger context. We're not going to start to break down things into little, or else we'll be here all day. We're looking at it as a wider picture. How does the wider picture, because if we start to break it down, we're going to end up taking so many different tangents that we cannot explore. So let's look at it in a wide array, contextually is the way I would like to approach this. So Maponga, go ahead and guide us here, because the Black man came from where you're at today in Africa. You're out of the rest of the panel. You're the one who's actually in the homeland. So guide us here, because you're actually in the homeland. So I think you're muted there. We can't hear you.
I'm saying, is this our father-in-law, so that I know what to say and what not to say?
Yes, yeah. You may want to watch what comes forth.
Otherwise, I might have some few goats to send back to the village. Nice to meet you, Dad. Nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
Pleasure. And I think what the professor is saying there is quite critical. And I developed this small little tool that I'm holding in my hand, which I think will be a good place to start as a point of conversation to build up on what we were speaking about last week. The three segments are speaking of time: the past, the present, and the future. At the end here, I want to put Western ideologies, which is basically American. That's where you guys are. Here, I want to put Europe. That is right in the north. Here, I want to put Asia. That is in the east. And here, I want to put the south, which is African, which is Ubuntu. So you find that what we are discussing right now emanates from what I want to call, which has already been termed as world views. And how do you interpret one individual from one culture to the other? So when you speak about men, I have the first 7 questions to ask. What were men like in the past? And if you want to be more specific to African men, one thing, If you want to be more specific to Black American men, another story. If you want to be more specific to men in general, worldwide. So you can decide whether you want to become specific or you want to become general. But the first most important question will be the historical question. What were men like in the past where we are coming from? I'm not necessarily giving you a time frame where you can cut the past and the present. I'm just using this linear tool. Though time could be translated into cyclical, into horizontal, into zodiacal, and other frames of time frames. I'm not there. Just for the purpose of the illustration, we need to understand the historicity and the function of men in the past we are coming from. Then we can begin to talk about what is the function of the men in the present as we live now. How do we begin to define? Are we defining men by the furniture between their legs? Are we defining men by the amount of money in their banks? Are we defining men by the degrees on their backs? Are we defining men by the beards on their chins? Or are we defining manhood, the fact that they've gone through initiation schools? So in various cultures, it varies. In some certain cultures, if you have not been to an initiation school, you are not a man. You remain a boy throughout. So you can never undermine that your definition of a man in Kikuyu, in Igbo, in Himba, in Hadzas, could be the same with the Zulu, the Xhosa, the Tswanas, the Shona, and the Shanganis. That definition will vary from North Pole to South Pole. By the time you get to India, if being a man means that you can marry your own woman, then Indian women take the trophy. For then the women marry the men. They're the ones who pay the dowry. Then the whole definition goes upside down. So we need to be more specific in our conversation so that we can actually be able to drive towards a more clearer landing strip. The third question is, as we are defining men in the present, how is this developing itself into the future? When the boys of these days can no longer even put on their trousers. Their trousers are halfway between their bums and their knees. You know, in the olden days, my grandmother would have picked up a whip and smacked that boy silly and pulled that trousers up and said, pull it. But as we are looking into the future, I saw a picture the other day where actually the man is pulling on the trolley where his trousers is, and he's walking on the streets with his underwear. So if the definition of manhood becomes fashionable, then what is the future looking like? Over and above the fact that women can now buy babies from test tubes and women can now buy vibrators for sex in sex shops. What is the role of women into the future, which we are looking at? So you ask yourself those first three questions, the historical question, the present question, and the future question. Then you catapult that and say, question number 4, how are the men being defined in America? How are the men being defined in Europe? How are the men being defined in China and Asia? How are the men being defined in Africa? If you really want to become more sophisticated, then you can break down those 7 questions. You multiply them by the 7 interrogatives. That gives you the how, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the rest. Then you can ask the African question, the 7 questions. Ask the Chinese, the 7 questions. Ask the American, the 7 questions. Ask the European, the 7 questions. But in closing, the compass would be that we don't want to think from the West to Africa, where we should say, what is the definition of men in Europe and in America and in China, and whatever remains, that how Africa is going to define itself. We needed to turn the stick the other way around so that we prioritize our concepts of Ubuntu. I'm on the mainland. We define ourselves as Africans and not allow other nations to define us. Even the issue of women abuse, for example. Some people might want to come and say women abuse, women abuse. You go to the Ethiopian culture where there is a ceremony where women actually line up to have their husbands spank them so that they can have scars on their backs, and those scars are defined as love tokens. Now, will you impose yourself on this culture as an American and say this is evil because you are looking at it from the outside? The question is, what do the people inside that culture say about it themselves? You as a Christian can't walk up to the hot deserts of Saudi Arabia and tell those women to take off their clothes because the temperature is too hot. The cultural context will always inform you that you don't have to impose yourself. And this is the dangerous part, maybe, that we're now discussing black men. But the people discussing black men are in diaspora, sitting in Europe, already with a worldview that is American, influenced by the Western, which is American, European, and a bit of the Chinese, and then you're trying to interpret yourself from the outside. I recommend that our conversation must be internalized. We needed firstly to define ourselves as individuals, respecting our various specific cultures with their unique differences, so that the Kikuyu does not laugh at a Luo man, because the parameters of definition of manhood can even vary within the same country. I thank you.
Okay, good. So what I'm hearing from you is that we now have a unique challenge of trying to figure out how, because the Black man finds themselves either subconsciously or consciously just looking at himself through the lens of the dominant culture. And we're here in Europe, and it's gone worldwide. Do Black men then look at themselves through the lens of the white male patriarch society? Is that why we have an issue that we can't define ourselves?
I'll throw the question back at you. When the Black man is looking himself through the white culture, does the white man look at himself through the Black culture? Maybe that's more balanced.
Yeah.
So that we can we can talk and compare apples with apples. In as much as we are using a Eurocentric, a Western, or an Eastern world view of interpreting ourselves, do the other cultures also measure their masculinity using our parameters of manhood?
Yeah, I think that's the vital question. Professor Agoki instigated it. Joshua interrogated it. When we are seeking, why is it that we Black men are seeking to define ourselves or define what manhood is in the Black context? And we must further interrogate that, the Black context, the Black in Europe, the Black in America, if there are Black people in Asia, and then, or dark-skinned people in Asia and China, and then the Black person from Africa. Why is it? Because I do not believe that the Caucasian, Anglo, white European sit in the forums of this nature seeking to define who they are.
No.
In fact, they have defined who they are and have sought to impose it, who they are, on us. White supremacy. And so they have made us, as Black men, various colors, shapes, sizes, continents, Black men, they have made us question our own value. And the instruments upon which they use to oppress us institutionally has further affected our ability to process. So now in the West and in Europe, our boy children have been emasculated. Hence you see them sagging their pants. Hence you see them piercing their ears. Hence you see them straightening their hair. Hence you see them having manicures and pedicures. It is because masculinity of the Black man, what it means in the African context to be a man, has been violated violently violated by the white culture. When they took the slaves from Africa, they broke them down. Joshua, they changed their names. They took away their name from them. If you want to affect a man's thinking and psychology, you first thing first, you change their name. Then you force them to speak a language that is not theirs. Then you force them to abide by cultural symbols and norms that are foreign to theirs. So we spent generation upon generation seeking to learn the Eurocentric Western civilization way of thinking and their cultural norms and their institutions, and we have constantly felt out of place. Hence, coupled by a generational, all-encompassing insecurity complex, we want to define what a Black man is.
All right, and I do know the history is dark, but how do we move from, here's what I always have qualms with. Where do we move, when do we move from reflection, which is reflecting on the past, to self-actualization, where we hold a responsibility as Black society, as Black men, to regain our status. Reflection is
You're
good,
talking to a
but,
black
but,
man
but when
who
we,
is quite proud and to a
but when
large extent
reflection,
arrogant. What you are calling for is war. What you are calling for is war. On the two comments that have been given, Dr. Marshall, I see your hand there. What you're talking about is war. Because if you are saying, how do you move forward? And you are addressing that question with 400 years of institutionalization. You are asking a very simple question, but with a deep undertone that echoes for 400 years. The question is, how do you destroy an institution that has been entrenched so intrinsically for 400 years? Do we just say, let bygones be bygones, and we continue with our lives? Or do we lobby an outright war to break down the entire system and rewrite the system and restore that dignity that was destroyed? And the second thing is, can we have a shop? Do we have a Markham's shop? Do we have a Starbucks shop that sells Black dignity so that we can go there and buy it and give it back to the Black people? If we must restore that dignity, the question is, how do we do that? Do we make them Christians so that they can look forward to the second coming of Jesus? That's when their problems will be solved across the river. And yet, while we are waiting, how do we deal with the issues? So it's quite a deep question what you're asking, and it is intrinsic and repercussions that could even be leading us to war. And when the woman asked that question and asking the men, what are you going to do about it? I'll tell you, I'll take my spear and sword and I'll go to war.
Yes, well, the men are supposed to be in the forefront. That's what you're there for, and from your definition of a man, you're the only ones who can go in the forefront and begin that change.
Yeah, I'd like to hear.
And
I'd like
go
to
away
hear.
from mental slavery, because
Yeah,
when we get to mental slavery, yes.
yeah, I'd like to hear what Dr. Marshall says from his perspective, because Joshua is right that the fear of the dominant white society, the fear of a Black man, is that they recognize that the only way Black dignity can be fully realized is if Black men undid the institutions that presently stand. And we, Black men, understand that too. Yet we are invested in the status quo. And generationally, the zeal to correct the injustice, to restore the dignity of the Black man, generationally it is waning. So that the future generation will be completely compliant. So when you say, Bianca, we are reflecting, what do we do going forward? Yes. The question has far-reaching implications that I believe so far-reaching that the mind does not want to fathom its implication. How far-reaching? So perhaps the question could be, what can we do individually? Because collectively, there's only one answer. Collectively, there's only one option. But I'd like to hear what Dr. Marshall has to say.
I like this because you actually took some of the points that I was actually going to say. But one of the things that I'm thinking is, especially as Joshua was speaking, Pastor Joshua, is I'm thinking, okay, but what was the Black man before slavery? And I'm trying to figure out what that looked like, what that felt like, because in the American context, we really don't know, and there isn't any way for us to really learn. But there are attempts at trying to reclaim what was lost. But But you know, but I want to go back to what Professor Agoki was asking about does the white man define manhood through the eyes of a black man, the way that we are trying to define black man through the white man's eyes? Or if I'm getting that right, I hope I am. You know, after the Black Lives Matter rally in downtown Dallas this past June, I was talking to a black woman who said that the reason why white men are doing their best, white supremacy is doing their best to destroy the black man, is because the white man wants to be the black man. The black man is the competition. The black man is the strength. He is the brains. He is the creativity. And the only way to truly squash the black community and blackness in totality is to take away the head, the black man. And so as a result, what we've got to do as individuals is to really define ourselves as yes, we are black men. We're proud to be black men. In America, we have to work extra hard to learn about what came before slavery, because in American history, we don't exist until the slave ships show up. And I believe that is psychological, especially for black boys, to say that you first started off, your first existence was under the foot of a white man. And so to understand that the hierarchy is there and that you have to define yourself vis-a-vis the man that you're looking up to, the white man. And we've got to tear that down. So yeah, that's basically, that's where I'm at this moment thinking about this.
When Marshall speaks about this competition, this fear, the white man wanting to be us, because the white man recognizes that we have the strength, we have the genius, we have the entrepreneurial spirit, we are the providers, the protectors, the establishment of value, and therefore he wants to take us down. Perhaps that begins to define, and maybe Joshua can help us here, begins to define who we were and who we are from the African perspective. Maybe Professor Agoki, again, and I want to learn here because I've reflected upon this a lot, and I've come to the conclusions where Joshua has come, that this is going to require war. But what I had not interrogated was, what were we from the, what are men from the African perspective? That's, I think, what we should be dealing with. What are men? Let our children, our sons who watch this, hear us make an attempt to outline and define what men are from our historical African perspective. Josh, Professor.
Well, if I may jump in here, I'll say African men are what God intended them to be in society, in their context. Until the white men and the Arabs showed up to enslave and colonize the black. You see, history informs us as well. The blacks are very resilient. And if we may borrow from what happened to the Jews, anybody in world history who has been enslaved, they are enslaved and exploited by those who subjugate them because of inherent qualities that they have. And so here's where I'm going with this. Whether you want to look at it as colonization, that is slavery. Whether you want to look at it as slave trade, that is slavery. Whether you want to look at it as, religion, some of which does not liberate but enslaves, sad to say, unless truth is pursued. The sole purpose of all that is to exploit the black man and his resources, from the natural resources to the resources that obtain in the black continent. And so I'm very cognizant of the fact that it will not take anything less than a revolution, a war, yes, to reclaim our status, our God-given resources, both as human beings and on the continent of Africa. Because whether you like it or not, God has always used the black continent to save himself. Yes, that's how baby Jesus was rescued. Not only to save himself, but to build the world and to develop the world. And so that even today, why is China rushing to Africa? Yeah. So the point is, unless the black man, wherever they may be, in the diaspora and back on the continent, unless we rise up to say, where did we lose it? And how can we be vigilant to protect our own and reclaim our own? We will not get it. So the black must say they want to get back to the continent, develop the continent without all those puppets that we have by way of political leaders who have actually squandered our wealth in cahoots with the West. So this is the time to wake up and think seriously. And what I would implore here is we need like-minded people. We need data, yes, to inform us. Because the point is, when education was brought, we thought education was a vehicle for fighting poverty. Religion, together with education, was meant to fight poverty and civilize us. But there are other unintended consequences that came along. Because the first thing that was done was to brush aside all the wisdom and education and knowledge that we had, and even the technologies we had on the continent, calling them backward, primitive, and what have you, without giving them a chance to evolve, just like others have evolved. You and I know very well that when North America was colonized, immediately after the Industrial Revolution, in North America, they could not even make a wheelbarrow, let alone have those canals. They had to borrow everything from Europe to build the American continent. But see what happened to the natives here. Everything that was native, even the technology that was native, was messed up, including, of course, the culture. So the point is this: to reclaim our own manhood and our own culture, because we must bring along our children and our women from this kind of slavery, because really some of them have been used to abuse and misuse the black man. So it is important that we rise. I like the clarion call of rising, but we need data and we need to gather our thoughts to make sure that any form of slavery is erased and is defeated with all force.
See, something that I'm also thinking about when we talk about the revolution and war, like one thing that I'm always fighting is what is called mental slavery, mental colonization. And those that follow me on social media will catch me doing one of these four things quite often. I have a 4-prong attack on white supremacy and all that entails. The first is theological. The first one is because see, I'm a Christian, but the thing is though, before I left the faith and came back, when I started actually reading the Bible instead of listening to society, I did not realize that the Bible really takes place with a lot of folks that look like me. Growing up, I did not really understand that. Like I thought the Bible was, a European document that was all about, Jesus looked like Kenny G. That was like, no. So we have to truly break that chain, because so many blacks are Christian, but yet they think they worship a white Jesus, and that's not the case. The second one is historicals. Like, so, in the American context, yes, we may start with, the history books may start with slavery, but our actual development as a Black people in America was so much bigger and so much greater than that. But yet if you talk to an average Black person on the street, they can tell you slavery, Martin Luther King, Barack Obama. And it's like, that's the link. And it's like, what? Where's all the inventions? Where are all of the advancements of science, of music, art, literature, the Harlem Renaissance, and all that entails? Like, why do we deny the complexity and the beauty that is our own history? And so if we can't even, if Black Americans can't understand their greatness here in this little bitty context, it's going to take even a bigger war to get them to understand the greatness that is the African continent, and all of the many languages and all the many developments and all the great histories that are there, the pre-European histories, etc. And then we have the third one is the Cultural Revolution. Now I know you can't say Cultural Revolution because that sounds Chinese, but you got to see. But as I was trying to say last week about the Afropean, like we see ourselves as Black, but we also see ourselves as this mix of the white. And we value the white more than we value ourselves. And that's because society teaches us that white is better than Black. You learn that from television, you learn it from media, you learn it in schools. And so to turn that around, that's going to take blood, sweat, and tears. It took blood, sweat, and tears on my part as an adult. It's going to take the same effort with other people my generation and above, but then we have to teach our kids the same things that we've learned. And the last one is political. Now, I'm a political junkie. And the one thing that I'm always looking at is, okay, how can we as a people strategically fix the system such that that our interest, that our agenda is put forth and is advocated. And so, see, in the American context, we're only 13% of the population, but if we have a truly Black agenda, and that says this is what we need, these are our issues, these are our solutions, and we really articulate it with one voice, boom, we start making more progress in this context. But in the larger context, in terms of the political revolutions, like how come the American continent only looks at Africa as a place for extrapolating resources, or either that, or it's, the African continent is where all the poor little kids are that have they're starving and they're illiterate, and we've got to help them. It's a complete ignorance on our part and on this whole country's part. But I'm seeing that's actually international, that kind of misunderstanding. So in a sort of sense of a political revolution, I'm thinking like Marcus Garvey in this respect with Pan-Africanism, where we're on our part as Black Americans, we have to learn more about the political systems of Africa, of the Caribbean, of the diaspora, so that we can connect with our brothers and sisters across the pond, so that we as a globalized citizenry can begin this political revolution.
Okay, well, I hear what you're saying, Marshall, and I love it. Reason being, there are two things that happen, and especially I'm going to do it in the context of America, because that's where we start to see this. Every time we see a Black man killed by the police is when all of a sudden there's an increase in people wanting to know where their motherland is, wanting to to know the culture in Africa, wanting to identify with them. And that statement there is called being woke, right? For those of you who are very familiar with being woke. But there's a danger in being woke and uneducated. Why I say that is you can be totally woke but do not understand the history. Now we're dangerously on this level where people are just being woke, but they do not want to be educated. So that's where the men who are sitting here on my right, you have a responsibility as role models to model for those Black men who look just like you, because all of you have made it in your different fields and you come from a vast array of fields. So then it means coming up with our own education systems, like you say. And we've done, I was in American system since I was little. The only thing we learned about Black America was slavery. No one knew what happened before. In my older years now, and I'm 41, is when we started to figure out that some inventors were actually Black. They didn't teach that in school, and Marshall is here, he can tell us. So is it up to us to do the education from the grassroots as Black people, so that people are not woke but educated? And the second prong of this question is, you guys can cover it politically, because I heard you talk about politics. We as Black people sit down and relax when we're given tokens of people who kind of look like us to represent us, but they're truly not completely like us. Why do we relax when we're given a token as Black people to represent us politically, and they really do not understand our issues or what we want? So you guys take those two-pronged questions there and discuss those thoughts.
Yeah, so sorry, I don't want to take over your position, your banker, but I know that Joshua has been chewing on that stick for a while now.
Yes,
I know that he's about to explode, so I want Joshua to explode before we take on your questions, please.
Okay. All right, his body language there is probably going to yes. Okay, go ahead, Josh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marshall. Thank you, Dr. Agoki, for those brilliant contributions. I think it is timely, and oftentimes when people gather on such platforms, we share ideas at this level. But I think I'm getting a little bit more tired now, because I would want to know what do we do from here in terms of some form of even if it is some form of capturing of these conversations into a booklet, into a manual, some form of training programs, elementary education, or job creation, or brotherhood, or anything, some sort of a process, so that the conversation don't just end up on a Zoom meeting. Let again allow me to add 4 more layers of intent on my thinking tool. On the extreme end, I will talk about knowledge in all its fraternities, with all its disciplines, in all its proliferations, in all its various aspects, from engineering to theology, from theological sense to theological nonsense. All the forms of education that are there, both formal and informal education, just as long as you are learning. That's education. But how then does the Black man convert that education into number 2, into power? So we have educated people, but they're not powerful. They're just as weak as the weakest of those that are not educated. Because as long as we get educated to service the system as Black people, there is very little we can do. The Black man has not learned how to take his education and his knowledge and turn it into power by a simple fact: stopping spending our money on white institutions, on white businesses. Black people in America right now, Jay-Z's, Sidney Poitier's, name Morgan Freeman, Wimpy Oprah, name the rest of them. You have 1 or 2 Black institutions, the Motown, for example, that were created then in the slave trade. But you don't find an intentional move towards building institutionalized African knowledge systems where people such as Professor Agoki, Dr. Marshall can sit there. We right now celebrate Marcus Garvey, we celebrate the Kuhns, we celebrate the C.S. Lewis, we celebrate the Martin Luthers and etc. But can you tell me where you can walk up to an institution where all this knowledge system, which the Dr. Agoki calls the data, where this data is available so that it can actually be infused into the African mind, and we can produce our own theologians, produce our own bankers and commercial workers, produce our own academicians, produce our own technologies. Tell me that if we had all black people investing their money in black excellence, by now we'll not also be talking about a vaccine for this coronavirus that we have. When everyone is talking about a solution, here we are still talking about our identity as black people. Here we are. The world is on fire. People can't travel. People can't do nothing in the whole world. And here we are on a small little group talking what is the identity of a black man. I find that to be pathetic to the highest order, insulting myself included. That we actually have not yet learned how to transform our knowledge into power. By the time we are powerful, the third level then says, how do you convert that power into wisdom? Wisdom then is ethics, knowing the difference between right and wrong. Because your power and your knowledge does not necessarily make you ethical. People who have money, some of them have no ethics at all. So wisdom and knowledge are far apart. So how do we take knowledge, convert it into power? When we are powerful, how do we become wise with power? How do we become wise with power? Ultimately, how do we now become spiritually connected to the universe through the power we have, the wisdom that we have, and the knowledge that we have? Again, I will come back and say the European system thinks from this side going that way. You need knowledge, then from knowledge, you need power. From power, we hope that you'll get wisdom while you are in power. That's why even people like Donald Trump, we hope that now he's in power, at least he will have wisdom. But we all have learned that wisdom does not come with power. You can be powerful and still be a fool. Because if you don't understand the cardinal points of spirituality, hence as an African and again, I turn my stick the other direction. And I say, we need firstly to be logged in spiritually. And when we are spiritually connected, then we can download the information from a spiritual platform. And one of the key issues is to download wisdom. When we have wisdom, we don't need money, good people. We don't need donor money. We need wisdom on how to convert our resources into our solutions. So as long as we are thinking from the European direction, coming towards our problem, we will wait for donor money. But if we can become spiritually woke to download wisdom, from wisdom, we can manipulate our wisdom into power. And by the time we are powerful, all those who come in contact with us will come in contact with our knowledge system. This is the great pyramids of Giza. This is the great universities of Timbuktu. These are the great universities of Ethiopia, where now as people are coming in contact with your culture, they find these echelons of great excellence and power, which actually are symbols of a people who are in touch with Ra in the sun, controlling the moons and stars, naming stars. That's civilization of the highest order. But as Africans, as long as we are discussing petty issues of the sizes of our dicks, the sizes of our underwears, and how much money we have in the bank accounts, I think we still have a long way to debunk this mischief of being the only time an African thinks is powerful is when they are showing muscles. They're showing muscles of an African. Are we bulls? Are we only good for hard labor? Who has ever talked about the geniuses and you put a black face on those things? When they talk about the genius, they put Einstein. They're talking about the genius. That's the symbol which we all have come to see. Immediately you see that picture of Einstein, what goes through your mind? There is a genius. You will never be able to replace those things. So why can't we take our own symbols and replace them. But my calling for on this second session is that we needed to convert our associations. We needed to convert our knowledge, our power, our wisdom into a centralized place where some of us can download our institutional IP knowledge into those institutions. And as it were, I'll give you a last one. When you have a cell phone that is cheap, like the old ones that we had, where you could only take 100 numbers and nothing more, then when you want to save the next number, it says memory is full. You needed to go back on the phone and delete those numbers that were useless. So it was unfortunate. If your number is on my phone, you have not called me for 6 months or 1 year, and someone that is very important is standing in front of me, I go on my phone, boom, 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 boom. I delete 10 people who are useless on my phone, and I save the new one that is coming in. And when will Africa pick up this gadget we call civilization and actually discover that we are fully loaded with European junk? The old man is here. I cannot use foul language. We are fully loaded with European junk. We are fully loaded with the European junk. Even by the time we're talking and want to take new information, we no longer have space in our own minds, in our own spirituality, where we can even listen to each other. We needed to find a way of how do we swipe, delete all the useless files that are on this, that reboot the African mind to its factory settings. I thank you.
Now, deleting to factory settings includes.
Amen. Amen.
Yes, amen. For reverting to that, though, is if we're given all the things that Joshua said, if we were bestowed with all those things, we know we have them. But the question is, are we good stewards in and within ourselves to be able to see it through? Are we good stewards? Because
I think, sorry, Bianca, Joshua has given us a template that can be modeled at the micro level, where every man of color who is hearing this program can begin in this very day and age right now to change the method upon which they operate, make that connection spiritually. Make that connection spiritually and become acquainted with what exists already in our culture as Black men. Orient yourselves in what we've been able to give this so-called developed world. There is nothing. There are courthouses, there are Supreme Courts, the palaces where the kings, the houses where the presidents, the irrigation systems, the telephone systems, the GPS systems, the moon exploratory mechanisms have been given to us by people of color. In fact, from Egypt in Africa, where Jesus was protected, comes much of the basis of this so-called world that is called first. That is the first world. So we must connect as Black men first on a spiritual level, become centered and grounded. Understand that from the grounding spiritually, we will be able to discern what is right and wrong. That moral soil that is amongst us. We've abandoned morality as Black men for something that is malnourished, that has caused our society to break down. And trust me, once we begin to affiliate with our history as Black people, we will have much more meaning. Our interactions will be much more meaningful. We will not be intimidated by the Proud Boys and the white supremacists. We will stand firm because we built what they have.
Yep.
And if we didn't build it, they used our system of matriculation, our measurements, our philosophies, our research to do it. GPS, this phone, much of this comes from the African continent, including some of the apps that can have them locate where we are. It's an African. So we shouldn't be intimidated, but we should embrace that history. And we should be informed at a personal level, as Ralph Black, as Josh, as Professor Agoki, as Marshall, at a personal level, we must make that connection. And yes, in closing, we need to do what Joshua recommended. We need to come together and begin to do something definitive. We've spoken enough. It's almost an SO, yeah, and we need to do something practical. Thank you.
And to piggyback on what you're saying, Pastor Black, we as Black people, actually I'm piggybacking on Pastor Joshua here, because when you said about Western junk, that really stuck with me. And the thing about it is that we as Black people are going to have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable in the process of the purge, of getting rid of the stuff that we thought was true, the things that we thought were, this is what it is, and these are the facts, or this is the history, and it's turned out it's a lie. Because I mean, as I deal with racial justice seminars and things like that, one of the things I tell my white students is that you've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not doing anything. You're not making any progress. And so to turn that concept around on us, that purge is going to be hard. To realize that yes, so much of us is Western, so much of it is not what it should be, and to get back, but once we get rid of the junk, then we can bring in the quality.
I just have one closing remark. I will use the parable of the coronavirus, where they say we need to flatten the curve.
Yes.
And I'm saying that at a philosophical level, that we needed to start as Africans now to say, how do we flatten the curve? So that we could begin to see, we need to reach that moment where we can now begin to say, we are now on the downward descent. If you're on an aeroplane and you're about to go landing, now the pilot says, we are approaching the landing zone. And somewhere you need to do some adjustments on that curve. And I think until we are uncomfortable with being uncomfortable, as you are rightfully saying it, we will do very nothing. I thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for a great conversation. And there was a comment here from the audience. Professor Agoki, did you want to say one thing before I close it out here?
Well,
Do you have any last thought before I close it out?
I think this is just the beginning of what should be a fruitful conversation. It must carry on. We must not stop here. This is only the beginning. And I look forward to a greater interaction so that we can realize and actualize what seeds we have planted today and this past 2 weeks.
All right. And there was a comment here from the audience, from Sophie. We know when the rain started to fall, but it seems no efforts ever got instituted to shelter ourselves 400 years later. We know when the rain started to fall, but it seems no efforts ever got instituted to shelter ourselves 400 years later. Marshall,
Okay.
you want to
let me just speak quickly to that comment. So over the past 400 years in the American context, Black Americans have tried to create these institutions, create these cities and these, sort of like Black towns, Black Wall Street, etc. And between the years about 1877 till about 1940-ish, those towns were razed to the ground by the Klan and other white supremacist groups. In fact, Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, this past year, people who were born and raised in Tulsa were like, I didn't know that was here. Oh yeah, they did it all. And I'm just like, yeah, that's part of that. But yet I heard about Black Wall Street just from my parents living at home. So that's kind of so the perception that we haven't done anything, that's not quite accurate. Now, the thing that I would want to say though is that whatever we do, as it's going to be uncomfortable for us in terms of like getting rid of the Western waste and what have you. But at the same time, we're going to also have to be prepared for the resistance that the white supremacist institutions are going to put towards us as we go forth in this. So it's a two-pronged battle, and it's going to be very, very tough. But if we have that fortitude, we can make it happen.
And that's therein lies the question: do we have the fortitude to see it through? Do we have the resilience be adjourned. So until we see this gentleman again next time, let's continue working towards Black excellence, as Maponga said there, and make sure that if we're handed this, that we will end up not repeating history within ourselves, because there's a danger of that, of us enslaving others once we get that freedom. But let's be good stewards of what we're given and see how we can achieve this together. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Miss Wilda Black as I sign off here. You all have a great week.
Marshall, thank you, Joshua, and Professor Agoki for very good conversation. For me, I'll say, Black men, we need to arise. You are not who men say you are. You are who you are created. Your creator says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. I know we have a lot of knowledge with us. We need to turn that knowledge to power and try to spend our money to Black institutions that we have, as little as they are, but let's try to encourage that. And Black men, we need to change the method of which we operate, and we need to connect spiritually with each other. Wear our Blackness with honor and pride, like a garland gracing your neck, replacing your chain of bondage with that. Is bye from us here at Difficult Conversations. Bye-bye.